Whoa. That's a new thing. It now announces when recording's in process. At least I think it's new. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon on a July Wednesday in May. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Ben Van Camp. I'm the Vice President at the Chamber Collaborative, and it's really a pleasure to partner with our friends at the Seacoast Mental Health Center and talk a little bit about mental health awareness in the workplace and how you can support your employees. Before we dive into that, I think it's a requirement that I do a little soft plug for some upcoming chamber events. So I will do that briefly. On June 4th, we will be having our morning mixer. It'll be our first in-person networking event in many moons. So I hope you can join us for that. We will be at the Portsmouth Harbor Cruises. We will be dockside, unfortunately not going out on the boat on the water, but we will be dockside there on the 4th at 8:30 to 9:30 in the morning. We have a new member orientation on June 16th. And we have on June 17th, the Chamber's annual fiscal year end membership meeting where we elect new board members and do a little bit of a year in review. That will be a Zoom event on June 17th. So hopefully you can join us for that. It is 8:30 to 9:30 in the morning, and it's fairly dry topic, so you'll have to suffer through that, but it's going to be a fun one anyways. So with that being said, our topic today is mental health for your employees. And this is May is Mental Health Awareness Month. Am I getting that right, Rebecca?
Yep.
Perfect. All right. So there's lots of reasons to be concerned about your employees' mental health. Certainly just being a good person gives you reason to think about that and caring about your employees, but there's also a bit of a business case for that. And I just found a couple of quick stats that I thought I would share. That 86% of employees that do get treated for depression report improved work performance. And there are actually 40 to 60% less absenteeism of those folks. So there's some really great numbers and sense reasons to take care of your employees' mental health as well. So a few more people joining us. But with that, I'm going to introduce Rebecca Throop. She is Director of Community Relations. Did I get that right?
Vice President, Director, it's the same thing.
There you go. She does that. Anyways, and she does it very well. So we're delighted to have a great partnership with Rebecca. And I'm going to turn it over to her to lead us through today's session.
Awesome, Ben. Thank you. And you set the stage really well because I was going to open to talk about this. This is a topic, obviously, because of where we work, that's really near and dear to both Dennis's and my heart. First, I'll introduce my counterpart and teammate, my Laurel and Hardy partner here. Dennis Walker is our director, the head chief of our emergency services department at Seacoast. So he is in charge of anything to do with our 24/7 emergency services line, along with the work that our department does over at Exeter Hospital, because they staff the behavioral health services over there in the ED also. So for me personally, this topic actually comes out of kind of the last role that I had at my last job. I actually come from the too long career in the for-profit world. And from an HR perspective, mental health, caregiving, people's wellness, this has been a discussion in different variations for decades. When I first was starting, and I was coming into the disease management state of the world, it was how do we manage active medical diseases to get better performance? And then as time goes on, in my last role, it was how do we help people in their caregiving roles? And the bottom line is that all the stats are basically the same in different variations. So from a mental health perspective, a lot of times employers get really confused about how much they can set their foot into this, because they think that there are privacy laws, which there are, HIPAA issues, and they're just not sure that it makes sense to talk about. And honestly, a lot of people aren't comfortable about it. But as Ben alluded to, an employee's mental health dramatically impacts their productivity and their performance from a business perspective in the workplace. And it directly impacts the bottom line. And there's a phrase that we used in my last role, which was that caring is good business. And it really takes away from the personal human part of it, but it's very true. The Center for the Prevention of Health estimates from a mental health and mental illness perspective, along with substance use disorder, that those issues cost employers in the United States between $79 and $105 billion each year. And that was before the pandemic. There's a stat that we throw around a lot, which is that 1 in 5 Americans have a diagnosable mental illness. And I would say, I think all of us would argue across the state that work in the community mental health centers and in other social service and care situations, that it's much higher now. You know, we have all experienced loss, grief, dramatic changes, the constant need to adapt, isolation, you know, it goes on, and it impacts far more than this 1 in 5 in all different types of ways. And there's also the component that people forget when they talk about it with business, which is that business owners are not immune to this. So from a business perspective, you are dealing with your personal life and you're dealing with the financial stress of how your small business has been impacted, your own feelings of isolation, and the absolutely exhausting time commitment that it takes to run a small business through a major crisis like this. So from a business perspective, you know, there is the impact Ben mentioned about absenteeism. There's a productivity impact. There's something that's called presenteeism. I don't know if everyone knows what that is, but that's basically that the time that you're physically in the office, you are mentally, physically in the office. You are productive, you're doing your job. You're not distracted by the fact that you are feeling certain things, or that you have concerns about your family, or that you're making a million phone calls or trying to research stuff on the internet on work time. You are physically solid in your job. And then there's the obvious increased healthcare costs that come from mental health struggles and substance use disorder struggles. And for small businesses, obviously, like the chamber, members of the chamber, there's much more immediate impact that's felt out of the gate than really large businesses. Some of the stats to add to the ones that Ben said is that on the positive side, there's why is it good business, right? So to care about this, it's good business because caring for your employees wins loyalty. People are more productive and they have positive word of mouth. There's a stat, which is that 92% of employees say that they're more likely to stay with their job if their employer shows more empathy. So that either means your direct boss, or it means your business culture and the benefits that support you and wrap themselves around you as a whole. And from the productivity side, pretty much there's a stat that leaders who manage their employers with empathy see a 21% higher productivity rate. So there's not only that I'm physically here in my job, I'm able to physically do more work, but I actually work harder for my employer and my boss, who I believe cares about me. And so that's why caring is good business. You know, from a more immediate standpoint, as it relates to the pandemic, McKinsey, which, you know, people love to quote business stats from McKinsey. McKinsey is estimating that about 35 million additional Americans are now suffering from behavioral health issues since the start of the pandemic. I know that I get really lost in big national numbers sometimes. So this is where I want to start turning it over to Dennis to talk about a little bit more what we're seeing in our state. Because we are seeing, you know, the frontline workers in the mental health and substance use disorder world are seeing that 35 million at a very local level. So Dennis, do you want to talk about what we're seeing in the state and why this is impacting every single business in the community?
You know, it's funny, Rebecca, because the Seacoast Mental Health leadership team had a meeting with the leadership team over at Exeter Hospital last week. And one of the things I said to the CEO, Kevin Callahan, was that we likely, and this was kind of in a lot of ways, a meeting that has never happened. I mean, we go back with Exeter Hospital for 30 years, but to have all of their leadership team, all of our leadership team attend this meeting was kind of really, really special. But, you know, so one of the things I said was, we probably, even without the pandemic, we probably would have all been together here anyways, because if you look at the past 5 and 6 years in the state, we are looking at record numbers of people in crisis. I think we're up almost 40% over the past 5 years. So seeing more people than ever before in crisis. In fact, the past three months from looking at, say, January to March this year, we hit all record numbers as well. So our own numbers just paint what you're talking about, more people than ever before in crisis. And of course, the national numbers, they say the exact same thing, right? Anxiety through the roof, depression through the roof, suicidality, all pointing in directions that we don't want it to go. In our state alone, if you look at New Hampshire, we have one of the highest increases in suicide in the whole country. When I talk about that, I always say that doesn't really compute, does it? I mean, if you think about New Hampshire from a business perspective, I mean, we have one of the best states to grow a business, best states to raise a family. I mean, the outdoors, and I mean, it's low crime, low unemployment. It's a great place to live. But the mental health system, which is something we've been working on to improve, not so good. So the suicide rates in New Hampshire is something that we definitely have to continue to look at. And what was really strange about things kind of last year when the pandemic hit was we didn't initially see spikes in suicide, and we didn't initially see people coming to our emergency services. In fact, things went very, very quiet, which in the business of emergency mental health is not really something that feels so good, because we know that people are consistently and constantly in need of our services. And it was particularly kind of worrisome with not hearing from any kids, right? Because they weren't going to school, they weren't connecting with their guidance counselors and teachers, which we tend to get a lot of referrals from. So the numbers have not been pointing in the right direction, which has caused us to make sure more than ever before this past year to reach out to schools and places like core physicians and make sure that we're all kind of connected together in this kind of seamless network to make sure that people are getting the help that they need.
What's been really striking, I was actually doing a talk earlier this morning with a bunch of Wentworth Douglas physicians and there were some nursing staff, and it was around alcohol withdrawal. And I was with some other clinical people from different organizations. And the doctor that was doing a large portion of the talk showed stats which I've known from before the pandemic related to alcohol use, and I'm thinking about how, the co-occurrence. I mean, we're talking about mental health and we're talking about substance use disorder, and how we know that if alcohol use becomes problematic and, turns into the disease of addiction, alcohol use, those two sides are often connected. And as of 2017, New Hampshire, in terms of opioids, was only second to West Virginia and in use, and was one of the highest alcohol uses in the state. Well, since the pandemic, it's skyrocketed on the alcohol side in particular. And for women in particular, we're up 50%. The alcohol use for women is up 50% in the state. So when you think about, what is fueling all of this, there's also sort of all these other issues of just this fundamental inability to cope. And then people that maybe never thought they would have a problem all of a sudden turn around and realize, oh my God, I don't even know what to do with this.
Yeah, and it's all of us. I mean, we finally, if you've never really kind of understood, if you've maybe looked for afar, you were lucky enough to never have to, deal with anxiety or depression. Over the past year, right? We all had masks on. We all became fearful to be around each other. And as we're kind of picking up momentum with getting people vaccinated, this is only really the beginning of the kind of mental health side of it, right? Because just this morning, I was in a local shop getting a cup of coffee in Exeter, and I walked in and I put my mask on, and you walk in, you're like, oh, wait a minute. Some people don't have it on, some people do. What do I do? Am I in danger? And I've been vaccinated now for like 4 or 5 months. So, but I think if there's any positive from this whole situation, from the pandemic, is that we all get a sense of what it's like to feel anxious, to feel down, to feel disconnected. And maybe that will give us a greater understanding for reaching out to, if you have employees or maybe other family members, you can kind of harness that awareness now, having kind of maybe been through some of that yourself.
So that's a good segue. So can you share kind of, let's start sort of, there's two sides of signs people should look for. There's sort of like someone who's having a mental health struggle and then someone who's in a crisis. So can you share, Dennis, with some high level signs that all of us as both individuals, but also as employees and or business owners, what should you look for in somebody?
Well, right.
Struggling. Just on more the mental health, like someone who is struggling versus someone who's in crisis.
Right. So I think differentiating between somebody's in crisis and then somebody, maybe we'll talk a little bit about like if somebody's suicidal. But I think, for somebody in crisis, what you begin to see is, maybe looking at it from a business point of view, people start to show up a little bit late, right? People aren't maybe as calm, cool, and collected as they usually are. They maybe it's somebody who usually is a real pro dealing with customers and hanging in there. Maybe if you got a disgruntled customer, but maybe not so much anymore. And so, I think any kind of change from the norm, from what somebody's normally doing, normally functioning at, could be a sign that somebody is having a mental health crisis. Now, it doesn't always mean that, but certainly, if you're having somebody who's just a little bit more down, a little bit less energy, just not able to kind of do the things that they normally do, it's a good idea in this day and age to kind of ask about how things are going, just as a regular check-in, because there's probably not too many of us at this point who's functioning at 100% of what we normally do. So kind of just having a general awareness of where somebody normally functions at within a particular business, and then kind of asking yourself, well, is this what this person kind of normally does? And then asking about it.
So let's also look at sort of the crisis side. We'll sort of keep both. So how would you define signs of somebody who's beyond that, who's not just sort of coming in and maybe not functioning as well, and maybe not being snappy off and on, and what is something which all of a sudden is, wow, I think I might need to do about this. The case in point, and if you all didn't see it, there was an amazing story in the paper. Dennis was actually part of the interview for it, of a waitress over, was at the brewery, I think, in Portsmouth, yeah, who saved this man's life. She had some training, but she knew what to do when she saw something that lots of people might just gloss over. And all it is, and I think Janice, you'll talk to this, it's causing pause and it's saying something different. So first of all, what signs should you maybe look for?
Well, I think the big one that we, I think, tend to get repelled by because it's so upsetting to hear. And sometimes we will say something like, oh, well, you don't mean it. But when somebody talks about not wanting to live anymore, right? And generally the response that people have is, oh, well, you don't mean that. But the one, and this is kind of common sense, but this is kind of what the research says, right? Is the people who talk about it are the people who end up attempting to end their life by suicide. And so it's a simple but common sense thing that we all have to be aware of. People who are kind of functioning in a positive way, they don't talk about not wanting to live. They don't talk about wanting to die. They don't talk about wanting to kill themselves. And so like some other things that are huge warning signs would be talking about feeling hopeless or having no reason to live. Talking about being a burden to others. And a real obvious sign, right? If somebody was looking for a way to end their life, right? Looking to buy a gun. But, it's like, from what I've seen in the emergency department over and over again, is that people often kind of like, they say sarcastic things. Oh, well, I should just do that. I should just do that. And people don't ask the next question, which is, are you being serious? Do you really feel that way? One of the kind of stories that we point to, Rebecca, and I always forget this gentleman's name, but the person who jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge who survived.
Kevin Hines.
He tells this amazing story that day before he jumped off, which is, 99.9% of the people who do that die, right? Thank God he didn't that day. He did jump and he survived. But one of the things that he talked about was on the way to the bridge that day, he ran into 4 or 5 people. And he had sunglasses on, but he was, you could see the way he describes it, you could see the, tears on his face. And he said that if one person had asked me, a simple question, are you okay? Then he wouldn't have jumped that day. And the one particular thing he says was, as he was approaching the bridge, this couple said, hey, can you take a picture of us? And he had the tears coming down his face and he took the picture of this couple, but they never asked him. They never asked him if he was okay. And he really articulated in this incredible way, like, just if one person had asked me if I was okay, I wouldn't have jumped. And so, and what we know through as well, through the research, the suicide research, is that people will tell you if you ask. This kind of idea that, well, if someone's going to do it, they're going to do it, but that's not true. People will tell you that they are feeling that way and that they have been thinking about it. And it just becomes really important that we move away from the stigma of not asking, or, I think that general feeling like, oh my God, if I ask that question, I don't know, people aren't going to like me anymore, or they're going to think I'm intruding. It's actually the other way around. When you start asking people, the research says this, and all of our years in the emergency department tell us that too. People come in and they're feeling a certain way, and the tremendous relief of people just getting it out. Yeah, I was thinking about doing this or doing that, or I've been having these thoughts of not wanting to wake up in the morning. It's tremendously cathartic to get that off your chest. And then, obviously when you tell a mental health professional, they can help you plan around it and keep you safe and get you the necessary treatment that you need.
So on that, and thinking about how, I always put on sort of, there's the hat of like us as as general citizens, as people, with people, you know, the people we love, with our friends, with, you know, if you're walking down the street. And then there's us as professionals, you know, so you're sitting in your office as a colleague, or you're somebody's supervisor, or you run a small business and everybody is your staff. So how should people respond? I mean, so you see a sign, you know, if you know the tool of, well, I should ask this question, you know, are there times you shouldn't ask it? Or at what point do you pass this on? You know, I mean, I know when I've talked with people, they say like, well, gosh, if I step my foot in, like, I'm not equipped, I'm not trained, I don't know what to do, you know? So it's one thing to know the signs, and it's another thing to know, okay, I should ask this question if I think things are extreme, but then what? What do I do?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one of the most important things is to listen and be non-judgmental right out of the chute. I mean, it's hard to, you know, having done it, I've been, I think I'm going on my 28th year as a social worker now, and I think it's something kind of me and my team do kind of every day, but it doesn't come so naturally to, say, a supervisor or a manager or a business owner. But I think the first thing that you want to do is don't try to talk the person out of it, right? You don't want to say, oh, you got so much to live for, and oh, well, you're amazing here in the workplace and all that stuff. You really want to kind of listen non-judgmentally, and whenever you can, kind of zip your lips and say something like, well, all right, tell me more. If we really kind of look at our own lives, right? And I guess coming from this, from a business perspective, right? Even as a business owner or as a manager, whatever your goals are business-wise, you likely have either known somebody who has ended their life by suicide, or you have a friend of a friend, or there's some connection that you know of. And so it really becomes kind of all our responsibility in these moments to kind of be non-judgmental and listen and give reassurance that there's help out there. You just don't want to push away from it. You actually want to, at this time, pull yourself closer to it and listen and reassure, and in a lot of ways support the fact that somebody's saying something to you that is very, very difficult. Honestly, like the getting the help part, at the end of the day, it's the easiest thing to do. The hardest part is to don't push away from it. If you look at just from my team's perspective, we've had a lot of, over the years, business owners bringing their employees into the center. So we have a 24/7 operation. All the community mental health centers have a 24/7 emergency services team. And during open hours, you can literally walk somebody right into the community mental health center and say, I need to speak to emergency services. And there's just so many stories I could tell you, Rebecca, of people walking other people in and just coming up to the front desk with the person and saying, this person's in a mental health crisis, can you help us? And of course, that's what we specialize in. And again, all the community mental health centers have these emergency services teams that are available 24/7. And so that, in a lot of ways, that's kind of the easiest thing to do. The hardest thing to do is, to listen and to not be afraid to bring it up and to ask. That's the hardest thing.
So one of the things that, and if you go out and you do a lot of reading on this, from a business perspective, the big thing that's being said to businesses is to be proactive. If this makes you uncomfortable, it means it's what you have to do. And so what does that mean, right? there's this, you mentioned stigma, Dennis, and it seems to be the theme of my entire day. And another research group that people in business love to quote is the Pew Research Group. And Pew talks about the fact that about half of employees who are struggling significantly with a mental health issue will not talk about it at all at work because of fear of getting fired. So the number one thing that speaks to is culture. Everybody's favorite business buzzword. So what do we do about it? And it gets tied into a lot of the bigger work that I do, which is how do you normalize mental health? I mean, you're right when you said earlier, Dennis, like if you're going to find a silver lining, one of the silver linings possibly in COVID is the fact that all this stuff that's been sitting there under the surface has like bombarded to the top of discussion. It is all that you hear. I mean, yesterday on WMUR, they did a whole segment at 7:30. They did a special show on youth mental health. We're getting hit with interviews all the time for things. All the community mental health centers are. It's at the forefront of people's minds because it's beyond now people defining it as mental illness. It's wow, everybody I know is falling apart. And I know we're having discussions at work about now that almost like the cloud is lifting. Now that things feel lighter and they feel like they're going to end, now is when people are allowing themselves to fully fall apart. We're seeing both at work in terms of, the people that we have coming in, but also just, colleagues and friends. And now people are suddenly like, okay, I have less fear that I'm going to physically die from COVID. So now I'm just absolutely going to lose it and fall apart.
What's really amazing too, like from a business perspective as well, is that, so if you look at Seacoast Mental Health, last year during the pandemic, where all businesses were kind of shutting their doors, people and did more business than our previous year when we were basically shut down, right? So we kind of pivoted very quickly with telehealth and all this stuff. But I guess that's good because we were able to help so many people, but maybe not so good because cancellations and breaks historically for us is the time you would just take a deep breath and go out and run an errand and, just relax a little bit. And I was thinking about that so this year, as more vaccinations happen, more businesses open, more industries are going to be busy. But as you point out, Rebecca, that mental health tsunami could be on the cusp here, and we have to really pay attention to people who kind of work for us. I got to pay attention to my staff. Everybody has to pay attention even more than ever before, because all these businesses, and I hope and pray all these businesses do great business and all this stuff, but we still have to kind of pay attention to the employees.
Right, and that goes to something that Celeste put in the chat box, which was sort of like, well, what about that overwork piece? Which is something that's talked about prior to the pandemic. And as you mentioned, I mean, we on the leadership team at Seacoast are talking about all the time. And there's a variety of things that are sort of like, what are the top 7 things that a business needs to look at if it wants to start addressing anything in the wellness space, whether it's substance use disorder, whether it's mental health, whether it's the old school wellness. And that old, I hate the adage work-life balance because I think it's kind of garbage, but the whole how do you manage life is a big one. And COVID has really messed that up because it is, I mean, our boss talks about all the time, she absolutely ends meetings 5 of so that people can get out of their computer, go to the bathroom, and then sit back down at their computer. Right. So I think that is a number one thing that as business owners, everyone has to look at. We talk about it extensively for our own staff at Seacoast, is really looking at what is our new reality? What does it mean? What does it mean for our employees? And how do we manage it so that they're not completely maxed out? And how do we manage it so that we can fully function as ourselves as that organization? That's a really, we are not going back to just, let's go back to the way things were. And I think that it's very important as managers, supervisors, and as business owners to take that pause and to really assess that for yourself, because it does have a direct trickle down for employees. Burnout is the number one thing that will tip people over the edge as it relates to their mental health, but also as it relates to them quitting. And I think another big one is that, and I want to make sure we leave time for people to have sort of some fluid dialogue in this. But in terms of how does a business handle it? Everyone's organization is obviously structured different depending on your size and depending on what kind of benefits you have. But in terms of both substance use disorder and mental health, the biggest thing is removing that fear piece that we mentioned earlier, which all goes down to culture. And culture is a very overused word, but it's very true. It's not just about implementing a policy. It has to be something that gets embedded into the organization itself. And honestly, and that all starts, and this is something else we talk about a lot at work, it all starts at who is running the ship. If the people running the ship or running a department or the person that's directly overseeing somebody has stigma against something, you can have all the policies in the world and it's not going to work. It all starts with training your supervisors, your managers, and starts with the leaders of your organization. The Recovery Friendly Workplace does a lot of work around that from the substance use disorder side. It's all the same. I've always encouraged people, and it's something I do personally in my life, talk about your life. Talk about what's happened. If you want your employees to feel comfortable going to your HR department or talking to their peers or talking to their direct boss, then you as a business owner have to be willing to talk about yourself. You have to break out of that comfort zone. And it doesn't mean you have to share all your dark closet secrets, but it means having some sort of a business discussion around mental health, acknowledging that this is something that your business is willing to take seriously, sharing resources, training supervisors on what benefits you have. I can't even talk. I get embarrassed sometimes that I forget the benefits we have, because we have really great benefits at Seacoast. For being a nonprofit, we have excellent benefits, and I forget all the time what we have. And I have to, my staff will ask me and I have to go look it up, which is really embarrassing. But if you have an EAP, know what that means. Know what you can do for your staff and what the community resources are, which we can touch on, but we have a website page on our website. There's a whole page of all the area resources for substance use disorder, mental health services, all that kind of work. And I can be contacted at any time to get any of that information. It literally all starts with the leadership for changing that culture and trying to break that half of the employees that won't come to talk to you because they think they're going to get fired. And I saw something come in that I think, Dennis, so Ben put a question out about sort of what about prevention? What are some strategies we can implement in the workplace that are preventative measures? And Dennis, maybe you can talk a bit about this too. I think, as I said, some of it is sharing resources. There's something that we do at Seacoast, and if there's anyone here that crosses into Stratford County, that Community Partners also offers, which is called Mental Health First Aid, and we offer it for free at Seacoast, and it is essentially a crash course in really detailed how do you identify mental health issues in somebody. We have it both for people who work with kids, so people who, sort of like youth focused, and then adult focused. And it's an 8-hour, if I'm right, it's an 8-hour course, and it's fantastic. We have a handful of staff that are trained in it. It's a national program. And I think otherwise, from in terms of preventative, it's just really having that information available and having and creating that dialogue, starting the dialogue within your organization. I'm also reading what else is up here. Other creative ways that employers have supported staff mental health as things return to normal. More preventative measures like keeping a remote day or trying to reinforce life-work balance.
I think, Rebecca, one of the big things that people can do, and one of the most powerful forces for changing other people's behavior, and I think, Rebecca, you were kind of hinting to this, is modeling the behavior that you want, right? This is what we do with our kids. We give the behavior that we want to see in others, and it works really good with kids, and really good, I think, with employees. And so, first and foremost, as a supervisor, manager, or owner of a business, to look at yourself and make sure that you're modeling, putting your mental health first, right? So in other words, are you on your lunchtime clicking away at the computer, eating kind of mindlessly? Are you contacting your staff while on vacation? You know, are you kind of not putting yourself first when it comes to mental health? And that means, sometimes that means, you know, if you have your own therapist and getting out during the day to kind of make that therapy appointment, to kind of keep that, you know, as a priority. So modeling the behavior that you want and really taking a look in the mirror and saying, all right, well, where am I on that spectrum? Am I somebody who just completely puts everything ahead of my own emotional welfare? And if that's the case, kind of what can you do then incrementally to start modeling for your staff or your employees that you're going to put your own mental health at the forefront?
That's a really, really important point, because I've had a number that violated that. You know, we have emails at midnight. We'd have emails at, now I'm an early bird, but you know, I'd be getting emails at 3 o'clock in the morning. And there is, even if it's very hard for an employee, and of course, the more you go down in sort of rank, the more they feel that is, well, obviously that's the expectation. Even if someone's obviously never said it's the expectation, it becomes the expectation. I can tell you that our CEO at Seacoast is really trained herself to model that. She has a half an hour that is her lunchtime that she is completely unreachable. I mean, like if there was an emergency, she would be, but like, we know that is her time. She does not schedule stuff during that time. She will not work during that time. She actually physically leaves the office during that time, you know, and so we all feel that way. And then we all model it down to our staff. Vacations, unless someone chooses to violate it, is totally respected. This is the first job in 25 years that I have not felt that I need to work on vacation. And it is not because I don't work more than 40 hours a week, you know? So there's really, again, it goes back to kind of how things are set, and it's a dialogue. I think another really good strategy, which we implemented here, it's one of my personal loves because of the kind of work that I do, which is communications, was when the crisis hit, and it was really easy to run out of the office. You know, everybody just ran home and everyone was on the same page and everyone was afraid and together, and that was all great. But then it was sort of like, well, then what? How do we handle this? And so we started incredibly over communicating, probably more from my knowledge than the history we've ever had at Seacoast. And I had suggested to our boss, since we're all dispersed now, why don't we touch base, meaning we being you, touch base with the staff once a day. And so she started an all staff email. And it's something that I had done in a previous job of mine once a week for our CEO, was we're just going to send out what's going on today. And this has morphed into probably one of the greatest things that's happened for our culture at Seacoast in decades, as far as she has said. And we're down now to 2 times a week. And she would share everything. She would share, here's what's going on with the state, here's what's going on federally, here's what's going on at Seacoast operationally. And then people started sharing photos, and then we started making contests in any way that we could try and stay connected. And the feedback from staff was, I feel like one. And I feel like I can share this. So now we've seen, like, I knew things that now I know people that actually do powerlifting that I never would thought do powerlifting. And I know people who raise squirrels. And I mean, there's like all these little tidbits about my staff. So now I look at them in a totally different way. And now if they share something with me, I feel like I can share something with them. And that kind of communication is something I think for all businesses to really look at, is how do we just increase more being, not a family, because that just sounds ridiculous, but how do we really, in all ways, which all flows back to supporting people's mental health and making it a more supportive place for people to go to somebody and say, I need some help or I need time off. How do we communicate in a way maybe that makes it less of a hierarchy and more sort of an integrated powerhouse? I don't want to be remiss, and then I want to see what came in the chat, to mention the fact that along with the cultural thing, there's obviously having specific benefits do matter. Having an EAP. I would recommend working with organizations like the Recovery Friendly Workplace, or reaching out to us about sort of what kinds of ways can businesses be supported to support mental health and substance use disorder services, since that's not what you do. That is what we do, but it's not what you do. And these outside organizations, we understand that. We on the Seacoast have an amazing network. We are very, very lucky to have an amazing network of resources to support both of those sides. We have everything from peer support organizations to clubhouses people can go to. There's all sorts of meetings. There's all sorts of activities to support people that are working on this. There's obviously clinical pieces. Portsmouth, we do a direct partnership on a fellowship side to support behavioral health work with Portsmouth Hospital. Dennis's team is pretty much the arm in Exeter's ED, and we're very tight partners with them. We've been fostering, and Dennis's team has been helping train a lot of the local police departments to help work on mental health challenges from a mental health perspective, versus more of a what's the word I'm looking for? I don't want to say cop perspective, but taking sort of a more of a mental health lens, knowing the questions to ask. He's been helping train them, and these are all things we can help businesses with too. So really take a look at, do I have the kinds of benefits that if someone came to me and said, I need a month, I need to take care of this, what would you do? And again, going back to sort of what the business leaders in the nation are saying right now, which is be proactive, recognize this is good business to do, and just take a look at yourself from a business perspective, a personal perspective. My favorite phrase, take a pause, and then you're ready for the people that will come to you if you can help set some of that up. I'm reading Karen. Hi, Karen.
Hi, Rebecca. Thanks
Hi.
to Recovery Friendly Workplace. We so appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, they have some really great resources, and it's the stuff that Recovery Friendly Workplace, the state program does, is really fantastic. But ultimately, again, it all goes back to culturally, is it something that then you'll embrace? Something that I like to read. I like to read this business stuff. I understand that these are two enormous organizations to look at, but there's some really great national companies, of course, with giant deep pockets, but that do some really simple things for their staff. Starbucks is one. Cisco is another one. You can go Dell, believe it or not, Dell is one. You know, you can Google some of what these people are doing. I mean, just here in our little organization, you know, and it is reinforced regularly by our CEO, is for every supervisor and team manager, team leader to about twice a year, go do something with your team on us. So I can tell you that my staff and I, we're going out for pedicures in 2 weeks on Seacoast. And it's really, you know, I mean, yeah, I can afford to take my staff out for a pedicure, but it's the acknowledgement to all of us of, I recognize that you may need a break. We recognize the value of the work that you're doing. Go figure out, and it's not on us to tell you how to go take free time. So you go figure out how to take free time. What works for you? We have people I know that have gotten together to do cornhole. There was one team in the past few weeks that went and did axe throwing, because that's the kind of self-care that works for them. You know, I'm going to go stick my feet in a warm tub. They chose to throw axes, but that's, you know, and it promotes team bonding. It's an acknowledgement from the business that we matter. And I can tell you that you hear people talking really positively about it. So that's a really simple kind of thing that people can do.
Rebecca, I just want to mention that I love that you're mentioning some of these other options. As per my question, you know, there are times, because, you know, the system is a bit overwhelmed, especially right now, that people can't get right in to get the appropriate level of care. And so some of these other options that you're mentioning are really key. And the way you're speaking about how businesses can be proactive in terms of, you know, improving and growing that culture, to be more compassionate and understanding and not judgmental, and to connect people to interim resources that can help before they, you know, might be going to the next level of care. So I really appreciate your comments about that. And, you know, we're happy to provide some of those resources, as we do to all the businesses that we work with throughout the state as well. So.
Yeah, I really do encourage anyone on here, if you're curious, it sounds like such fluff, but go out and Google the return on investment of empathy, and you will be amazed. I mean, this has been studied way before COVID, and it sounds so simple. Like, if I just show people I work with that I care, and I care for them, which in turn means I care for their families, the return is huge. And when you think about it, and one of my colleagues in one of the other centers said this really well the other week, so I'm going to steal from him. You know, it's a win-win for everybody. So if an individual is doing well and taken care of, then their employment and their job is going to do well and be taken care of, which means their employer is going to do well and be taken care of, which means the community will do well and be taken care of. And it just compounds upon itself. So I just, you know, it is just so important to take care of this. Dennis, do you have any last tips for anyone from, you know, I mean, you're the expert clinician here versus me.
I was just thinking, you know, one of the things I'm really proud of is that my team, we're one of the, I think the only teams in the whole state that had no staff turnover all of last year. And if you know anything about emergency services, it's generally got a high turnover rate because it's hard. And a lot of clinicians don't want to do that work. And so, you know, I had just kind of set my mind over the past year to simplify my job as the director, which was to take care of the people who were doing the frontline work. And that's what I did. And it wasn't anything kind of extraordinary. It's basically what you're talking about, Rebecca, which is checking in and empathy and listening. And I really try to, you know, be the greatest listener I could over the past year. And I think it sounds like it's not very powerful, but it is so powerful to bring that awareness and to just disconnect from everything you're doing, be right in front of your staff and just say, how is it going? In a real way, in a real way, where you're just sitting back and you have nothing to do, no place to go, but to be right with that person. And I think it pays dividends to listen and have empathy. And the fact that we didn't have turnover during a very, very tumultuous time, record-setting numbers, I'm really proud of. And yeah, I don't think it's anything extraordinary other than just really being there with them and listening and taking care of them the best that I could.
I would say that coming off an era when we all have felt isolated, and that is being attributed to actually like one of the number one reasons why the mental health piece has ticked up across all the ages, across all the diagnosed existing conditions, is that people were isolated. And oddly enough, we don't deal with that well, and so, yeah, I would say that really looking at someone and genuinely checking in how they're doing, it breaks that isolation.
Yeah, and to leave everybody with this, I mean, it's at this point in history, we are probably the most connected we've ever been with our technology, but we're the most lonely that we've ever been. So connecting kind of in person with an employee, checking in with them, looking at them, it's everything.
Well, great. There was so much there. And thank you both for your time today and for just the work that you do. I've had the experience, not as a patient, to spend a lot of time in the Exeter ED lately as an observer. And I've seen firsthand the work that your team does there. And I've seen firsthand the true forefront of the crisis that it does exist in our Seacoast community that, does appear to be this perfect little utopia, but there is certainly, a challenge there and a need there. And thank you for doing all that you do to fill that. So I hope everyone got a lot out of this today. I certainly did. I have to stop using Post-it notes because I use like 10. I need to get a sheet of paper before these things because there's just so much to write down and so much to absorb. But I know your contact information is on the website. So if people do have further questions and ways that want to reach out and explore some partnership opportunities, I'm sure they can do that. And I'm happy to connect people too if that's easier for them. So with that, I appreciate everything and look forward to partnering with Seacoast Mental Health Center again.
Thanks for asking.
Thank you all for being here.
And we do encourage people to reach out to us at any point in time. In fact, Ben can share my contact information, and if I'm not the right person to talk for your answers, I can get you to the right person.
Great. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful afternoon. Dennis and Rebecca, if you could just hang out for one moment, I appreciate it.